Beginning, and let's find our screen share, and let's share this again and adjust the volume. For some reason the volume jumps up and down on this system and I have to keep pulling it back to the center, almost like an emotion. So here we go.
Disclaimer. The information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GAN's processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
And I'd also like to thank Elias for providing these disclaimers, as we've been using them throughout the foundation. Thank you very much, Elias, for all your work.
Thank you very much, Mark. It's very pleasing to see the participation of so many people, and it's increasing every week. This is very important, and a lot of it has to do with KFTV, and so every language is looking to produce this, and I believe at the last count is about 40 different languages are looking to be translated, and so content becomes very, very important, and it's nice to see that's what we're all working on. This is part of the North American Corona team that includes Canada, the US, and of course Mexico, which has opened a factory now, and very shortly we should have some results coming out of the United States. But this is a Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute presentation. We are trying to teach the teachings of Marinta Okoli Keshe. He is the father of modern plasma science, and as such, we are trying to bridge the over 3,000 hours that we have in the archives with the new teaching that is coming on every Knowledge Seekers Workshop every Thursday. And the challenge is ongoing, and the demands of the challenge are actually increasing because we are transitioning from the conventional science, which has imposed many, many limitations, and we're looking at the plasma science, which is in the process of removing these limitations. And so what I have tried to do is to enhance this basic understanding in a dialogue that we can all participate with. And so today is an extension of the basic understanding. The subject is bones, and we all like to pick at bones. My name is Alexander. I'm from Canada. It is May 23rd, 2021. This is a presentation of the Keshe Foundation Canada Plasma Education Series. It is the continuation of the education series that was begun in Brazil and continued in Italy. And now it's in the Hispanic community. We had basic teaching, which started with terminology. We moved into intermediate teaching and advanced teaching. But all of this is actually basic understanding, because we have billions of people around this planet who are absolutely craving for this knowledge. And in too many cases, it's actually a matter of life and death. So this is not an entertainment channel. And this is something that we have to look at how our society is changing. And even within the last week, we've seen phenomenal changes. And so this teaching is welcoming new students. It is enhancing the knowledge and giving a capability to the many mature students to exercise the terminology, exercise the thinking, use the dialogue in a cohesive manner so that we can communicate. Because really that's what it's all about, is about the communication. And as Mark mentioned earlier today, the Peace Dome is somehow being communicated around the world through the spraying of the plasma water. And for a lot of people, they don't really understand this and they don't have a respect for this. So it really boils down to basic understanding, and can we extend that? And one of the vehicles to extend that is not only through the new students and the advanced students, but through teachers as well. So this whole process that we're going is an exercise for teachers. And I can't emphasize this enough. Regardless of the language, we need more teachers, because we cannot, what we're doing right now is we're reaching tens of thousands of people. That's not enough. We are all overworked and overburdened because the basic understanding is not there. This has actually been a failure of the educational system that's been going on for the last, well, 5 decades at least. So what we've tried to do is discuss some kind of connection between the old physics and the new physics. So we discussed the X, Y, and Z axis, but it all boils down to health and vitality. And so we discussed some fundamental things about our health and vitality and how it relates. We discussed the Krebs cycle, the DNA, and codons from the DNA. And we've tried to progress. And as you can see, some of the ideas that we have percolating, and this is hoping to try and keep up with Mr. Kesh somehow, although that's a Mount Everest to climb for all of us. We just need to keep pace, and we can keep pace if we can elevate ourselves to transcend into higher levels where we have not only higher understanding, but a higher transfer of knowledge at a higher rate, many orders of magnitude higher than we have on the physical basis. And so last week we talked about the brain and how many brains we have in our body, because fortunately for us, all of these are operating on an autonomous basis, because we have over 70 trillion cells in our body, and it's kind of fairly difficult to organize that. And it's a lot more people, a lot more cells than we have people on this planet, and it's a lot more than we can all organize. So there is an organization. And so we see that the brain has helped throughout the body, and the brain has been a vehicle for the soul. And so how do we transcend from the soul to the bones? And what are the bones? And then where do we go from here? And we really can't get there from here until we have some kind of vehicle to travel with. So what we're trying to do is review the book number 1, which is the Universal Order of Creation of Matter. And I have emphasized that these are 2 titles. We're talking about the order of creation and the creation of matter, 2 separate things. And the one, because we don't, from our terminology, we really don't understand the matter. It's like understanding the difference between electromagnetic and gravitational magnetical. We're talking about 2 different worlds. And we find that one of the fundamentals that we're having problems with our educational system is we're not demanding enough. We are not demanding enough of our educational system. We're not demanding enough of our society, our political leaders, nor are we demanding enough of ourselves, because the whole universe was created and we are part of that creation. this old physics ideology of deciding whether you're a participant or an observer, implying that you can extricate yourself from the universe to observe the universe, is really ludicrous. We are part of the universe, and so our participation in the universe is mandatory. Our observation of the universe is arbitrary. That's based on our point of view, our knowledge, our education, and a few other things, because we are always exchanging energy. The universe is existing from energy. And so this energy is a charge in motion, and energy is always in motion. So the rules that apply, shall we say, in the electromagnetic world also apply in the plasmatic world. It's just that science has not been able to totally, shall we say, articulate the basic rules. And the basic rules are that energy is always in motion. So there's a direction, there's a flow, there's a strength of flow, and there's a decision. A decision. When did that happen? So one of the decisions when we look at the front cover of the book is the creation of a basic matter. And we see the convergence of three matter forces, all of which are plasmatic. We're talking about matter, dark matter, and antimatter. But that is just the creation of the principal matter. Now, what happens when we exchange energy with other plasmatic forces? So there's an interaction of this energy. And there's an ebb and flow, a pushing and a pulling, a giving and taking. And that's where the infinity loop comes in. And we wonder, the infinity loop is as old as the ages. And, you know, how did the barbarians in our history understand this advanced technology? Maybe they had the advanced technology and the barbarians took over. And maybe we're the barbarians. So terminology is very, very important. And we'll try not to make a commentary on this because this is an educational platform. And we want to use this terminology. All the understandings of whether it's magnetical or gravitational, and introducing nanostate and GaN state, and the various energy levels of orders of magnitude, these are all representations of charge as energy in motion. And so this is organized, logical, sequential, and consistent. And when we look at how we move energy, we see that there are various dimensions. And when we see these dimensions, we understand dimensions as having a geometry. And so then from this geometry, we look at dimensions interacting with other dimensions, and then we introduce a dynamism. And then with that dynamism, there's always a question, how dynamic is it? And this is the gradient charge that we see, which affects the field strength. So when we look at the various terminologies as we try and add, we see that we do have principal matter and the amino acids, which are the foundations and the building blocks for the DNA-RNA combination. And then we see the star formations, which are fundamental geometry that gives us a basic plasma state. And then in interaction with various plasma states, we have a dynamic plasma state. And so in the process of manifestation, we have a non-tangible manifestation and a tangible manifestation. And in the non-tangible state manifestation, energies can move. Energies have residues. In the physical, these residues are called artifacts. And when we have historians looking through our residue, do they see the non-tangible plasmatic state that is the substrate of the artifact? And how did this artifact happen? And so we see that the movement of energy through all of these levels is literally a conversion, is a conversion from one state to another state. And there are rules to follow. And this is what we've been trying to emphasize, these rules. because these are universal rules. So when we look at the basic energy, it's an energy package. And we wonder how the corona seems to understand this, and we need these classes to explain it. But we see that there is a progression, and so this progression follows a normal sequence. We're not talking about chaos theory, we're talking about organized theory, and the organized theory follows a sequence. And it's very important to have these sequences because there's a lot of organization that needs to be going on. So as we're all preoccupied with our tiny perfect worlds, and when we compare to the rest of the universe, we find that, man, we better be organized. One of the things that we talked about, the piezoelectric effect, and I've hung on to this because we're going to talk about bones today. And the other thing, the plasma feeding is an ongoing educational point, especially in the last month, last 4 Knowledge Seekers workshops. This plasma feeding is more important than it's ever been. And so how do we have a plasma feeding related with the piezoelectric effect? As soon as we say electric, you know, we're talking about old technology, but what does it mean? And so when we're looking at going back to our basic classes, we find that we have straight lines and we have bent lines, and this creates something. And the basics is when we discuss surface to volume ratio, we find that the ends of the lines are smaller than the middle of the line. The middle of the line is bigger than the end of the line. So the end of the line is negative. And by creating a bend, we find the point of the bend has a smaller surface to volume ratio than the rest of the line. So now we've introduced another negative charge. And then in between the negative charges, we understand in the plasma science that this is a two-way street. And so we know that through our various automotive industries, electronic industries, chemical industries, there's positives and negatives. So we understand that. Well, in the plasma science, that is also there, except for one big difference, is that these things are always in balance. And then so what we're looking at is the difference in this balance. And it is possible to have a difference in this balance. So the balance we call a maggrav, but the difference in the balance, we either call it magnetical or gravitational. And so we have to take into account that there are other dimensions. So as soon as we create a bend in the road, if you will, we've introduced another dimension. And what is unique about this is that this is how we have a relationship between hydrogen and oxygen. Hydrogen being very magnetical and oxygen being very, very gravitational. And there are other factors that come into play. But the reason I bring this up is because every bodybuilder knows how to build up their bones. Before you can build up the muscles, you have to build up the bones, because it's the bones that hold up the muscles. And so one of the things that we like to do to build up our muscles is to eat a lot of protein. But, you know, when you have protein, you need to balance that off with essential amino acids. So we find that bodybuilders who are on a high protein diet are actually overcompensating for the growth. And it's a very short-sighted way to go. The more important thing is when we do the stressing of the bones, we find that on the area, if this were to represent, say, on the left-hand side, the elbow, and on the right-hand side, the hand, and that you're doing a curl and picking up a weight, you are stressing the bone in the middle. And that stressing of the bone causes a bending. This is the piezoelectric effect. And this is exactly how the bone is strengthening. But is this energy to strengthen the bone coming just from this food that we eat? Well, no, it is coming from the amino acids. And the amino acids are the basis and the source of physical life on this planet. So we have the 4 basic parts of the amino acid, which we have identified as nitrogen, hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen. And we find that, well, we said the hydrogen is magnetical and the oxygen is gravitational. And the nitrogen, which composes over 80% of our environment, is actually the facilitator. And the connector between our environment and our magnetical gravitational field forces is the carbon. The carbon is the connector. Okay, so now we have the amino acid, and on this earth we have another type of product that we call water, which is the universal solvent, and it is comprised of, well, guess what? Hydrogen and oxygen. Only this time there are two hydrogens and one oxygen, and this allows us to release one hydrogen as part of the currency of energy transfer. The currency of energy transfer is the hydrogen. And what is remaining is the hydroxyl. And this hydroxyl, now being negatively charged because it's lost the hydrogen, is looking for a home. And this is one of the beauties of water. Water is a universal solvent. And water has a lot of the characteristics that GANS does. And we'll talk about more of that later on. But the thing about it is that this energy that has been released, we don't know where it's going, but it's looking to go somewhere. And that somewhere is the basis of creation, which is a gravitational component, which we call the neutron. And isn't it interesting that the neutron is not available in the hydrogen, but it is available in every other element of the periodic table of elements. And this is where we discussed in the past, and we're reviewing a little bit. And so we looked at the basic atomic math, and we found that the neutron is the atomic nucleus of an element, and it consists of electrons and protons. And we found that electrons and protons have mass, so we can say that hydrogen has mass. But neutron mass also identifies the material. And if we were to choose a material, say like oxygen, it has electrons and protons and also neutrons. So the oxygen also carries a mass. So here we have two gases which are carrying mass. But when we look at the plasma physics, we find that there's something wrong with the math. And so when we add up the mass of the electron and the mass of the proton, it doesn't equal the mass of the neutron. Well, it's close, but it doesn't work. And then we have another limitation in our thinking, and this is the second law of thermodynamics, and which involves entropy. And there's also something missing there. So that doesn't add up. So we're finding one of the limitations in our understanding of physics is that we are basing our knowledge on things that are incomplete, inconsistent, and actually not balancing. And so one of the things that's been missing has been the understanding of how matter is created and how matter comes from here to there. And so one of the basic components is the PM ticks. And the PM ticks come from the breakdown of the neutron into the electron-proton combination. Just like the hydrogen is released from the water when you decide to maybe wash the dishes or wash the car or drink the water. So this is energy in motion. Well, the consistency of this energy in motion, and it's irrelevant whether it's in space or on Earth, it has to do with principal matter. And there are different energy levels within the principal matter, and that includes matter state, dark matter, and antimatter. All three matter energy levels, which are different by orders of magnitude, are all together in the basic PM tick construction. And as such, they are looking for a home because they do not have a neutron gravitational force. So they are totally magnetical. And that is the basics of the science. So when we look at how the science on Earth is working, we understand that we have a loss of heat, we see things decay, we talk about the half-life of nuclear decay, and these are all imposing limitations of our knowledge. And at the heart of this is really the second law of thermodynamics. You see, the fact of the matter is we generate heat. Doesn't matter if it's cold outside and we go outside, we're still warm on the inside. And so this generation of heat is an indication of life. It is an indication of a counter-entropic activity. So counter-entropic is a generation of heat. And so we find that life is counter-entropic. And so when we look at regular matter science, and we see that the loss of heat and the decay is the old science, and the new science is dealing with life and with creation, and then we find, well, we're actually the protesters of matter state science. And this becomes very fundamental when we're looking at how we create energy within our body. And the modern science has been very good at identifying the basic components. And here we have a trinity of cytochrome A, B, and C, which are producing on each level 12 ATP. And we find that a healthy cell has 36 ATP, and the relationship is to one glucose molecule. So this is identified in the Krebs cycle, and there is a sequence. It has to go through a sequence. But we find there's a disruption in the sequence, and there's a penalty to pay, and that is in the cytochrome B, where we're only having 1/6 of the capability. And there's a reason for this, and that is because we're not able to produce the oxygen that we need in the cytochrome B as we have in cytochrome A and C. And so we find that an unhealthy cell, the conditioning of that, it's not producing enough of what it takes. And so our whole basis of our, shall we say, health protocols, when we talk about psychology, we see it as a pharmacological problem. And then when we talk about our physiology, we see that as a mental problem. And all of this has come about through an educational system, which has really thrown a lot of limitations. And can you believe it? There are educational systems out there which are actually promoting the deception, the double cross. These are the things that cause us to be scatterbrained, as we discussed it last week. So we're not clear thinking. We should be clear thinking. And the way we can do this is to engage our soul, because our soul is clear thinking. It's the manifestation of the physicality that we're having a problem. And so today we'd like to discuss the bones. And of course, the bones are part of the skeletal system. And so when you look at the bones, what you have to realize is that there's some patterns that happen. So if we look at the structure of the arm, we find that it's very similar to the structure of the leg. But you wonder how archaeologists are able to assemble dinosaur bones, because there's a relationship. The leg bone is bigger than the arm bone. The ratios are kind of the same. We have a shoulder, we have an elbow, we have a wrist. And in the leg bone, we have a hip, we have a knee, and we have an ankle. And there is a size differential, and it only stands to reason because the legs support the entire body, whereas the arms allow us to do things. But then we look at another interesting aspect of the bone structure. We find that our head is actually an encapsulation, kind of like a corona. And what it does is encapsulates the brain. Then we look at the rib cage, and it's kind of has a lot of gaps in the rib cage, and that is kind of protecting our emotional organs, the lungs, the heart, the thyroid, and stuff like that. And then we have a spine, which is kind of communicating to the rest of the body. And then we have hips, which are kind of connecting the upper part of the body to the lower part of the body. And so if we find all of these bones together through the relationships of the bones, we can find where these bones go. And there is a sequence. And each part of the bones is kind of unique. And it's interesting, when we are born, we don't have this skeleton when we're born, when we're sitting in the womb of our mother. All we have is the basic amino acid, and all we have to communicate with is our DNA. And it is from there that we begin this growth. And the question is, how do we do this? So we talked about having opposing thumbs. So we see that, the arms come up over the head and they go forward. And the head, of course, is protecting the brain. And then the brain needs to build up subbrains. And these subbrains need protection. And so we find that the skeletal system is not only offering us an opportunity to move, but it is also offering us a cushioning and a protection of our emotional system, and is definitely giving us maximum protection for our brain system. And so we look at the structure of these bones, where we find that the head bone encapsulates the brain, whereas our body encapsulates the bones. And so there's some kind of crossover where the outside goes inside and the inside goes outside. Kind of the same thing as what the brain does, where the left side controls the right side and the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body. And so there's a crossover there as well. And so this crossover becomes a very, very important point, because it also affects our crossover from the plasmatic reality to the physical reality. So when we look at the basics, the amino acid, we see on the periodic table of elements that it involves carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, and hydrogen. And that when we produce the GANs, we are using copper and zinc. And so the problem here is that none of these elements are the main elements of bones. So something is just not working here. So we see that our amino acids are missing something, but what they are producing are the basis of this, and that is from the amino acids, we produce water. When we produce amino acids, which is the building blocks for protein, and the protein allows the formation of water. So the water is the universal solvent. Oil and water don't mix, and thank God for that. Otherwise, we would all be mush. And then somehow, some way, we have bones. So, here is the original CO2 GANS cup, and we used a nano-coated copper coil with a zinc plate, and we put a load on that. We put that in salt water, and we developed a CO2 GANS. And then we had an amino acid on the surface, and we produced an H2O in there. So we have two dimensions. We had the x-axis and the y-axis. The y-axis is allowing the amino acid to come from the sky, right? From the thin air or fat air, whichever you wish to discuss. So we still don't explain where more energy is coming in. And before we go to that, we have to understand that when we're looking at the GANs, and I'm finding that this point has been missed, and so I'd like to repeat it again, and I may have to repeat it again and again. Plasma energy is the giving and taking of energy, so there's always an exchange of energy. So the negative is the giver, the positive is the taker. And when we look at the motion of the GANs in the water, it doesn't move because of gravity. It moves because there is a transition of energy. So in other words, before you can take energy, you have to give energy. And if we look at the various levels within the water, and we say when we're looking at these light blue lines, we can consider those as energy levels, as plasmatic energy levels, because plasma has the same kind of affinity as GANS does. And the closer we get to the gravitational field, the stronger the energy. So in order to move this GANS through the water, it has to release energy above and pick up energy from below so that it can move. And the faster it moves is indication of the steepness of the transition gradient. So as we cut through various gradient charges, we call that the transition of energy. So that is the y-axis, the going from the pole, North Pole to the South Pole and vice versa. So the transition of these energy flows is how the GANS moves through the water. And so we find that that is the basis of the GANS affinity. Well, water has an interesting characteristic that happens when it comes in contact with this GANS. And so we find that it's very important health-wise for alkalinity. And so when we look at the pH of water, in the physical science, there are two ways, maybe others, but there are two ways that we can raise the pH of the water. And one is with a chemical additive. So if you have acidic water, you add an alkaline substance and you raise the pH. Another way to do it is through electrolysis. And why is this important? Well, because already going back to 1923, we understand that cancer tissues are acidic and healthy tissues are alkaline. So all form of cancer have two basic conditions, acidosis and hypoxia, which is the lack of oxygen. So this is basic knowledge that has been around for many, many years, and we wonder why we're still talking about it today. Well, I think the problem is that we really don't understand the science that we've talked about. So if we expand this periodic table of elements, we find the two missing ingredients that we've been talking about. One is calcium, which is a fundamental component of the bone structure. And why I throw magnesium in here is because we are horizontal people and the vertical people are dependent on magnesium. And so that becomes another important component as well. And so we kind of query, why are plants so smart that they can work with the plasma energy flow of the relationship between the sun and the earth, and we're still bogged down in matter state? And the reason we're bogged down in matter state is because of the lack of understanding of the role of calcium. And that is a problem because you see, calcium can be water soluble. And this is important if we're looking for nutritional uptake. But generally speaking, calcium is insoluble. And the big problem for calcium then is if we mix it in with water, it really doesn't dissolve. It is just in suspension in the water. So what is the importance of calcium? Well, calcium is a fundamental structure of bones. And the biggest bone in the body is the thigh bone. And one of the things that we like to do is we like to scrape the bone marrow because we're all advanced scientists. And we like to harvest stem cells because we find that they help with healing. But the body does this naturally. And in the thigh bone, we produce white blood cells and we produce red blood cells. So the white blood cells have to do with the lymph system, and that has to do with, shall we say, creating organisms to promote healing. And the red blood cells is part of the circulatory system, the blood system, and that is to provide nourishment. It is also, both of these systems are delivery systems. And the interesting thing, of course, is that the red blood cells come in contact with the white blood cells. The white blood cells come in contact with every cell in the body. So the cells in the body are not in contact with the red blood cells in, shall we say, a direct physical link. So there is a combination of energy that is flowing between the white and the red blood cells. And this is what's going on in the bones. And so we find that what's going on inside the bones is like a kitchen where there's a lot of energy being transacted. And there's a lot of stuff that's being prepared. And all of these things that are being prepared are for our benefit. And who is organizing this? Okay, who is the lion tamer? who's the boss? Who's the one who is issuing the orders to do this? And you know, how is this so well organized? And I think now we understand what happens when we run into ill health problems. And so one of those problems, of course, is osteoporosis, which actually is the depletion of calcium in the bone. So the bones actually become brittle. Another problem with osteoporosis is we are still producing calcium with our body, but it's not being delivered to the correct sites. So that leads to something called arthritis, which is actually calcium deposits in the wrong places. So it's not part of our bones, but it's on top of our bones, and it inhibits our motion. Another part of poor health that is a big signal is the sensitivity of teeth. And what that involves is a depletion of calcium in the teeth. Yes, the teeth are very dependent on calcium, so it's very, very important to have a good supply of calcium. And we find that there are products that actually fill the holes within the teeth. And this is what allows the protection against this sensitivity that can cause us pain. What the body was originally doing, of course, was providing the calcium to, obviously, we had to grow the teeth, we had to grow the skeletons, we had to grow the bones. And we find that there are other things that are involved. Oh yes, that brain which is composed on a large percentage of calcium. And we find that one of the problems with brain problems is the hardening of the pineal gland and pituitary gland within the brain. And so this hardening, well, in the proper places, we grow a skull or we grow a skeleton or we grow a bone, but in the wrong places, we create a condition known as either Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and other mental problems, dementia, and then arthritis and all sorts of good things, right? And so what it boils down to is if we have a hardening in the brain, then how can the brain control the other subbrains, and how can these other subbrains control all the trillions of cells in our body? So fundamentally, what we're talking about is communication. And so there is a communication within a cell. So there's an inside of a cell and an outside of the cell, right? So that's intercellular communication, where the cell can say, open the doors, please. I like to let the food in. I like to let the waste out. And there's an intercellular communication, so that one cell knows what the other cell is doing. But we find that all of these cells have an address. And all of these cells, they're not just in our skin. They're not just in our body. They're in our bones as well. And these are all well organized. So we find that a disorganization is a disruption of this communication. And that's basically what cancer is. And so one of the things that, you know, we really, really depend on, especially as children, because let's face it, we have very flexible bones. And this is very important for the mother's sake, so that when we get born, we don't cause as much damage as we could if our bones were very, very rigid. But we have a system in our society where we're frowning on mother's milk. And why this is important is because we see in our society that somebody somewhere has figured out that cow's milk is better for human babies than mother's milk is. I wonder if mother's milk would be better for cow babies. I don't know, it's just a stupid question. But there's another interesting thing that's happened in our society is that we now also have a baby formula, which is man-made. And so somehow, some way, a baby formula would be better than cow's milk, which somehow, some way is better than mother's milk. And then, of course, we find that through the degeneration of our bones, what we call osteoporosis and arthritis and dementia, we have a product that generically is called coral calcium. And anyway, what the claim to fame of this is that it has a 56% water-soluble calcium uptake as compared to 17% from mother's milk. And so therefore, this calcium supplementation is very, very important for the body because it's much better than mother's milk. Really? Is it possible that mother's milk is exactly what we need and anything above that is like superfluous? So I think, anytime that man puts himself ahead of the universal knowledge is the beginning of the, shall we say, imposing limitations on the knowledge. All of these things are audaciously saying that mother's milk is bad. And, it's really too bad for our children that they have to depend on mother's milk, isn't it? I don't know how we got that way, but it is an indication of the malaise in our society. I talked about the connection and the similarity between nerves. We have a neuron and we have dendrons, where we have the synaptic gap, the neuron on the left, the dendrites on the right, and the similarity between the chains of the atoms and the chains of the monatomic nanocoating of the copper coil. And then we look at the chains of the amino acids, essential fatty acids, and we see the similarities of that. And then we look at ourselves and we say, well, how are we able to stand up? Well, we have to have a spine. We have to have bones to hold us up. And this, of course, is in the face of things like jellyfish, isn't it? Jellyfish don't have any bones, and yet they exist. But anyway, so when we look at the stacker unit and we find at the top of the stacker unit is the soul cup, and then we have the emotional cup and the physical cup. And then we have two other cups, which we haven't discussed much about, but one of them has to do with the inertia and the bottom one has to do with the earth. And when we're looking at how other creatures adapt to that, we've talked about rotating fields. And what's interesting about the snails is that they're able to create a shell around them, kind of like our cranium, kind of like our skull, right? Except that it isn't just for our brain, it's for the entire body, okay? Legs and spine and everything is inside the shell. And so this shell grows in and follows the Fibonacci sequence. And so as it goes in the rotation, it gets larger and larger and larger. But the interesting component with this seashell is that it also has spikes, which are growing perpendicular to the rotation of the original cell. And they are growing out from the basis of the cell. So we have a rotating field that is growing around, and we have a rotating field that is growing up from. So we have two rotating fields. And, let's look at another interesting phenomenon. Life is for learning. And hunters in our country are very proud when they can get and kill an animal like a moose. And, just bragging rights. And so this particular set of antlers has 10 points. So this is shall we say, a prize. And you can see that, the moose is part of our emblem on the KFTV logo. And so it's funny, we know that the moose has a head, and inside the head, he has a brain. And we know that this moose, which weighs about a ton, and which is pretty heavy. And just so that you know, this moose is big enough that you can drive your car under its belly You may or may not touch the belly, but this is a massive creature, and so it needs massive bones. And on top of the skeleton and on top of the skull, it has a set of horns. So this is now another type of growth. So it's kind of really different. So if we go from the range of jellyfish, which have no bones, and we look at humans who have basically a skeleton, which is inside the body, and a skull, which is around the brain. And then we compare that to that of a nerve. And so we find that there is a kind of a roundness in the neuron of the nerve. And then it kind of becomes straggly down at the dendrites. So this is kind of straggly like our arms and legs. And so there's a similarity there. And then we see how the myelin sheath goes around the axon, which has a real similarity to the cups, the 5-cup stacker unit, which has a real similarity to the spine of man. And so we are actually incomplete, where we're just missing a set of horns, right? That would make our lives complete. So all these things have a relationship. And so we talked about relationships of singularity, duality, and trinity, the Holy Trinity, and these are all dimensions. And to understand which dimension we're operating in, we have to have a reference. And so the reference is by field. Once we understand the field, which gives us context, then we can establish a relationship. And what we found in the past is that we are actually none of these dimensions. The physical dimensions are not our dimensions, the real plasma dimensions. But what we have now is an understanding that from our basic GANs, which we looked at the CO2 GANs, which is kind of the basic connector to our life, we find that calcium has a connection, and that is with one oxygen. And if we were to take the carbon, which is connected to 2 oxygen, and add it to the calcium with 1 oxygen, we come out to what is a calcium carbonate, which is a calcium, carbon, and 3 oxygen. And so what we have is our soul, which is what we're born with, and we have emotions, and we are looking at some kind of physical connection. Connection to what? So the first question is our environment, and our environment is the physical interaction of the plasmatic connection between the sun and the earth. And so we are here, and that becomes our transition into the physicality. This is our visible reality. And what is our environment made from? So what are we made from? We are organic because we're carbon-based, but the earth is silicon-based. And we talked about this in the past, and we see in the growth of concrete, which means, by saying growth, it means that it's sentient. We know that it heats up, so it's counterentropic. And this is done through hydration. And the hydration is from the outside to the center. And this is always done in the presence of water. Oh, that universal solvent. And so what we're producing is basically called SiO4. And so this is the fundamental component of the Earth's crust. So the Earth is inorganic, and that's what it means. The Earth, inorganic, silicon-based, man, organic, carbon-based. That's what it means. And so when we look at the components of cement and we find, oh, well, here's something. We have dicalcium silicate, tricalcium silicate, tricalcium aluminate, and tetracalcium aluminoferrite. We have calcium, in all of the basic components of cement, and they all work in different ratios and they work together. And in the process, they consume calcium. Somehow they consume calcium, and we see a migration from SiO2 to SiO4, which is part of the growth. There's another growth that takes place, and it goes beyond that, from SiO4 to SiO6. That is very advanced science. And what happens there is that the calcium is actually replaced with magnesium. This is strange, because calcium really is very soft. And actually magnesium is very soft as well. But magnesium is very essential for the vertical people. So the calcium is very essential for us, and the magnesium is very essential for the vertical people. Not to say that calcium is not an important component for the vertical people, but magnesium is more important. Whereas for us, the calcium is more important, because this is our interaction when our soul is looking for positioning and trying to find out where is our position in relationship to the plasmatic field between the sun and the earth. And so we understand that we have an emotional and physical construct within our brain. We have an emotional and physical construct within our body. And we discussed that today, because the physical construct is our skeleton. And then there's an emotion within our body, which is part of the lungs, the heart, and the thyroid, and is protected by that skeleton in a cage. But then we have the brain, which is encapsulated with a physical bone that goes around. And so there's a method to this madness. And in the way we operate through the Krebs cycle and how we exchange energy is through the constant flipping of the polarity of the interchange of energies. So the positive becomes negative, the negative becomes positive. This is the two-way street of the magnetical gravitational plasma forces. So when we are looking at the physicality, it's an earthbound strength. The physicality, the manifestation of the skeleton and the cells and the body and everything else is all part of the interaction with the earth. And we, as plasmatic beings, we have a connection to the universe. So we've got things kind of backwards. Our head is smaller than our body, but the physical strength of our body is bigger than our head, but the universal strength of our head is bigger than our body, because we're connected to the universal soul of man. So now we're transcending through different ranges. We're transcending through different dimensions within the range on this planet. And so we understand that in order to get here, we had to have a plasmatic strength, because we didn't have a physical strength. When we were born, prior to us being born, we had to come from somewhere. We didn't come from nowhere, we came from somewhere. So, but we couldn't come with a skeleton, and that would have been very painful. So when we look at matter and understanding what matter in all cases is a manifestation of energy. So there's an old science and the new science, and we refer both of these as matter. But the thing is that matter is a manifestation of this energy, and the manifestation can be either binding on a small scale, or it can be creation on a large scale. So energy binding is creation. That's all part and parcel of the same process. And this energy binding is of a plasmatic nature. So when we look at matter plasma, the difference between the physical plasma and the matter plasma is one you can touch and you can see, the other one you cannot touch and you cannot see it, but you can definitely sense it. And it is this sensing that carries a force. And so this force is carried through an energy which has a mass. And so we find that light carries that mass. And so what we're talking about on a plasmatic basis, non-physical light is non-physical. So it's a light matter. This is what the matter plasma is, as opposed to the dark matter. And all of this has to do with the relationship. So the light matter is magnetical, the dark matter would be gravitational. And the balance between the magnetic and gravitational field forces is what we call a maggrav. So these are the basis of relationships. And another relationship that we have is we have the limitations of the scientific community and the limitations of the spiritual community, because this is the way that our society has been structured. But if we take these two sciences and add them together, we find that we're beginning to have a better understanding of plasma matter. And we have to understand that it is from the plasma matter that the cells can manifest. So the plasma matter manifests into the physical matter. And so we have the cells of a key component is calcium. From that, we can produce bones. Key component is calcium. And we are basically then, therefore, converting the energy coming from the soul to the matter state. This is what we're talking about, conversion of energy. This is the plasma science. And so to understand reality, this is a key component. Two fields come together, they form another. So any formation of any field is a manifestation. This manifestation has to be fed. The plasma feeding is what leads to the manifestation, because the manifestation can be non-tangible or tangible, non-visible or visible, plasmatic or physical. Yes, there is a plasmatic reality. There is a physical reality. You cannot have a physical reality without having a plasma reality. It ain't going to happen. You can have a plasma reality without having a physical reality. That can happen. Manifestation, whether it's a plasmatic reality or a physical reality, is a form artifact. Can you recognize this form artifact? Can you decipher what is going on? And so we look at our reality, which we interpret every moment of every day, is the emotion of presence. And so our emotion of presence is actually a form artifact of all of this energy in motion within our body, within our cells, within our brain, within our environment on the earth, and then within the universal energies that not only travel through our solar system, but through the unicos. And so this now becomes the most important thing to understand. Basically, simply, plasma, magnetical energy, is a balance of attraction and repulsion, and they're both. So with the magnetical giving, we create a field. With the gravitational taking, we create a field. The combination of these two, it gives us a basis of giving and taking. This is how energy is in motion. And so we always have to decide, what are we giving our energy to, and where are we taking the energy from? And do we get to decide? Yeah, you bet you. And this is what makes the magnetical difference. The magnetical is the combination of the attraction repulsion force plus a giving force, which is magnetical. So therefore the opposite is true. The gravitational is a repulsion attraction force plus a taking force, which is gravitational. So the attraction repulsion force is your basic maggrav, and then you have excess energy, which you're giving, that's magnetical, and then you have a depletion. And so it's a taking force the maggrav needs to take, and that's your gravitational. And this is always going on. And so the beauty of what we have, which are called the cups of life, you have to understand they're not called the cups of pandemic. And we're missing this point. that each and every one of us has the capability of making the cup of life and making that part of our environment where the plasma energy that is coming from the cups of life can then link up to create the plasma dome, the dome of peace. This is what it's all about. So there are classes to identify how to make the cups. We start with the zinc plate, the copper coil, and the nano-coated copper coil. But what we're interested is to understand that we create inside the cup a magnetical field and a gravitational field. Then I repeat this at every class, because now we're coming to the point where this is going to be a regular part of our life. It is very important in many different aspects. We've only begun to scratch the surface in our uses. And so we find that when we look at these three components in the cup of life, there's an interaction of fields. And so we are drawing in energy that is of a higher energy state, and that is against. And so based on this particular design, we have the zinc GaNs and the copper GaNs, and we find that the combination of two bring in that connector, the CO2 GaNs, what comes from the fat air. We bring in the amino acid, and when we have the amino acid, we build up the water. Well, you know what? We also have calcium carbonate GaNs. It's getting really full inside the cup. There's a whole lot of stuff going on. And then we say, well, we brought the second cup. We just substitute the zinc plate for the copper plate, and we still have the magnetical field, and we still have the gravitational field. But there's been an energy change, and that is that one cup is emotional and one cup is physical. And there's an interaction similar in both, but we're dealing on energy strengths that are different. And so both have a magnetical, and this magnetical is not restricted by the physicality of the glass cup. Excuse me, we're talking about plasma energy. The plasma energy cannot see the physical manifestation, cannot. It will transcend that, go right through it. So if we're using it for the pandemic, keep them at least 1 meter apart and produce them separately. Very important, emotional, physical construct. Then we have the gravitational. One moment. Thank you very much. I had a chance to drink some cold coffee. So, energy packs in the universe understand this implicitly. They follow the rules. What else do we need to do to follow these rules? Well, higher strength feeds the weaker strength, so we deplete the energy. We can also convert the energy. So we're always converting energy, aren't we? When we eat, that's what we do. We take the energy from one and convert it to another. That's the same thing we do with the virus. We convert the energy. And so once that is done, and generally speaking, shall we say, it could take a few days, and that's all it would take. And then we get into the rest of the story, and that involves the cups of man. And we see that the relationship of the cups of man, when we put the two together, we have a gravitational taker and a magnetical giver. And we see the fields working together, and they create a maggrav condition between the two, of which there's a magnetical field, and then there's a gravitational field. Now we've set up a maggrav condition where we can bring the cup of soul in, right? That kind of completes the basic trinity. We have a magnetical, we have a gravitational, and we have a soul. Not only do we have a soul in each and every cup, but we have the combination soul, excuse me, which completes the star formation. And then when we now look at our GaNs and we see the rotating field in the GaNs, this is a GaNs that's produced inside the cup of one. And then we see there's a hole in the GANs. And we say, well, there's nothing there. Really? How can there nothing be there? You see, GANs has an affinity. It gives and takes energy. We've seen GANs on the physical plane. We know that GANs is a gas in a nanosolid. And so on that basis, it connects with the emotional plane. And then we see our body, which has a physical, which includes the muscles and the skeleton and all the other cells. And then we see an emotional plane. And so our body is actually a GANS spaceship. This is a huge revelation. So now when we look at the positioning of the stacker unit, we find that it mimics our spine, and it is giving energy to all parts of the body. And so whether we are a squirrel or a dog or a moose, we have 2 arms, 2 legs, and when we can't carry the weight with our 2 legs, then we have to have 4 legs. We still have a head, and in order to, shall we say, maybe defend ourselves, we may have to have horns on top. We don't need horns on top. We have a skull that protects our brain, and so what we find is our brain also needs to be fed. And one of the key components of brain food is calcium. And we know that calcium is a key component of the skeleton. So can we say that the brain is actually a brain bone, except that it's kind of mushy the way our bones are when we're born, very, very flexible. They can bend without breaking. But when we get old, we tend to get brittle. And so what we're looking at is how can we get from our brittle bones to basically our youthful vitality. And what we're talking about in the plasma science, the word is regeneration. The regeneration of the cells. A key component within our cells is the calcium. The regeneration of our bones, in other words, limbs, etc. Key component is calcium. When we look at our body health, the alkalinity of our body is very important. Key component for that is the calcium. How do we make the plasma water alkaline without chemical supplementation, without electrolysis? Magic happens. It becomes alkaline. And you know that jumping from one pH to another pH is an order of magnitude. And I have seen it go 2 orders of magnitude through the plasma reactors. And then we find that our health of our brains, well, wait a second. We've had capability of pulling people out of a coma. We've had capability of regenerating from Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And we find that calcium is a key component of the brain. Well, these are all part of our physical matter. What about our soul? What happens with our soul? So one of the things that we see with our soul is a supragranular layer, which is only 3 cells thick. It encapsulates the corpus callosum, which is the entire brain, and is very unique to humans. This is what allows us to have a delay in consequences, and as a result of this delay in consequences, it also allows us to have a misconduct. But an interesting thing has happened. Is the supragranular layer part of the skin? Is it part of the blood? Is it part of the brain? Is it part of the bone? The supragranular layer is the connection between our soul on this environment and our soul from our source. And there has been discussion in the Knowledge Seekers Workshop where the skull can actually call for the soul. How does it do that? Stay tuned for the next exciting episode. Because when people ask you about plasma, don't go there. Just tell them plasma is a kind of energy state. It's very important. It's changing our life so that we understand when we are trying to figure out, are we backwards or upside down? We're neither. We are the link between the source and the environment. And so we have to understand that there are basic dimensions. And what you're looking at here is a non-physical dimension where we have the rotating field, the polar field, and we have the field strength, the X, Y, and Z axis, right? And then there's a relationship between the hemispheres. Just like on our brain, we have two hemispheres, but they're not the same, because if they were the same, they would be repelling, and they're not repelling, they are attracting. So we actually have to flip the pole around, right? And this is the failing. One moment, please. We have a general dogma of ignorance. It has to do with our physical managing of our history. And as they say, they're paid to dig and not paid to find it. Well, we are paid to find it, okay? Because this is a matter of life and death. You have to understand that our point of view is either earthbound or spacebound, and the combination of which is plasma bound. And that's the message that we're trying to convey to the rest of the universe. And we've started. We have the Cash Foundation, KFTV, where science meets the soul of man for the purposes of peace. And what is the final limiting factor? And that is the morality. The plasma science works through morality, compassion, and courage. These are the building blocks of creation. And so when we're looking at the Universal Body Enhancement Unit, we're looking to deliver the plasma satisfaction as can only be accomplished through the restoration of emotional and physical vitality. And so we have to understand that in terms of plasma, all things are working in combination. There's a pushing and a pulling, which we call magnetical and gravitational, and the balance of which is the mag-grav condition. And everything that we see in terms of physicality is a residue, because we can't take the physicality with us. The physicality has its limitations. So this gives you something to think about. When you want to pattern your life, you provide the pattern, that's the energy that you get. So you have to decide, you're going to tell the universe to shut up, or you're going to open up to the universe and yield to those powers and allow that to happen. Allow the universe to assist so that you can receive. You can receive the benefits of the energy from the universe, and that is coming to you. And not only are we the messengers of peace and friendship, but all of us are messengers of peace and friendship, because that is the determination of our souls. And our souls are the ones who dictate. And that's why the plasma science has been put in public domain. And that's why it's so essential for us to have the World Peace Treaty. We not only need to sign that with a pen, but we need to sign that with our souls. Because in order to have harmony and vitality on this planet, we have to have physical and emotional harmony within us. And that's when we start to seek that truth. That's what becomes from the knowledge that we're all working to get. But so what? Will that make a difference? That's the question. And that difference is to understand that this dynamic plasma state is within us already. But this is the universal language throughout the universe. And the universal language, in order for us to allow us to join the universal community, we need to deliver plasma science in exchange for peace on Earth. stay tuned for the next exciting episode. Thank you so much. Over to you, Mark.
Wow, lengthy teaching, Alex. Thank you. And hopefully you take a couple sips of warm coffee, or pineapple juice seems to help the throat clear. I know people that
Thank
were
you.
DJs or announcers, they used to keep a little glass of pineapple juice because apparently it helps to clear the throat at sometimes. You know, we heard a lot about calcium in the beginning when we first started with this corona, and it was calcifying the lung and the brain. Just wondering, I was thinking about the body being on the acidic side or the alkaline side. Would it matter with the corona whether you were, I always thought the alkaline side would precipitate out the calcium more, and the acid side would sort of dissolve it. And I know we were, or we are going to learn more about calcification and decalcification from this pandemic as we got into, Mr. Kesh had gotten into the calcium being removed from the women's hip, even though they stopped the menstrual cycle and all that. And we would figure out ways to recalcify. And that's one of the main, if you fall and break your hip, that is usually within a year or so, the person dies because there's something there that causes the person to sort of go way out of balance with this calcium. And again, I don't know a lot about it, but I used to work in the HVAC, and whenever you have a higher alkaline environment, the calcium seemed to precipitate out on the hottest parts of the system, which was where the heat transfer was taking place, causing like an insulating layer and therefore a reduction in efficiency of a system. So you're saying on the acid side, it's more disease, and on the alkaline side, it's healthier. But I was thinking sort of the alkalinity would, and is the calcium in your veins too? Is that what helps to form these plaques to sort of narrow down the arteries and so on?
See, this is one of the reasons that I did this presentation today, because clearly the brain, which depends on calcium, was created with you as a baby. And the skeleton, of course, was also created. So this buildup of the alkalinity, and we know the alkalinity is gravitational, so the buildup of these structures are also gravitational. So if those are not part of the structure, then they become part of the residue, and that becomes your magnetical field force. So you answering your own question, it obviously is beneficial for the body to have a gravitational benefit of this calcium, right? And that is alkalinity. So that's the basic understanding, and then you go from there.
And James had put in the first question into the chat. I don't know if you'd like to open your microphone, James, and maybe in a nutshell, Alex, you can just tell us about this Krebs cycle again. I know you've had a teaching on it, and he's asking, what is this Krebs cycle? Cytochrome?
Okay, let me, yeah. The Krebs cycle is an energy sequencing pattern. So you have to go through a sequence. If you don't go through a sequence, then then there's no order. And so as you migrate through these various energy levels, then you open up another energy level, and then something else can happen. So we are complex beings, and so we have complex activity. You know, we have a real problem with our nutritional system, where we believe that what we eat is, manifests in what we get. without understanding the basic components of what we eat. In other words, whatever we eat, whether it's vegetable or animal, is manifest from an energy source. So we're not eating the protein, right? We're not eating the meat. We're eating the essential energy. The meat, the food, the pasta cannot pass through the barrier from inside the stomach into the body. The only thing that can pass is the plasmatic energy. And it is through the passing of this plasmatic energy that we have the building. So when you look at your stomach and you see that you secrete water, or you look at your saliva and you secrete water, even you look at your lungs and you secrete water, if you're secreting water on one side, you are creating protein on the other side. And so the amino acids are the building blocks of the protein, and the protein are the building blocks of the muscles, the bones, and all the other tissues that go on. And the process of doing that is through the exchange of energy, and there has to be an orderliness, a sequencing. And so the cytochrome is a ordering of energy levels. And when we follow that in a healthy system, where we are converting hydrogen and oxygen, which are basically energy in motion, and we're doing it properly, then we have a success. And that success is 36 ATP for every 1 glucose. And when we are out of whack and we start to fail to produce all the right ingredients, we are only getting 26 ATP for 1 glucose. So we are short. So we have to eat more. And that's where the obesity comes in. Truly unhealthy people have to work harder to be healthier. They have to work 7 times harder to be healthier. And then we find out that cancer cells multiply 18 times faster than healthy cells. Why? Because we need it. That's, we're getting the low level energy. We're not getting the high energy transmission. So we need to get more. And as we get more and more, we put a burden on our system, and then the snowball effect takes over. And our society has introduced water pollution, air pollution, food pollution, and now the weapon of choice, mental pollution. That is the worst. When the doctor tells you, oh, we think you have cancer, 50% of your immune system shuts down. Where does the immune system get produced? Inside the bone marrow. And who runs that? You do. And when you are psychologically defeated, then the slippery slope begins. So nothing can save you if you don't have the will to live. And if you are living in a society that spews depression, okay, hopelessness, terrorism, this affects you psychologically. And the psychological manifestation comes out into your emotion. And then your emotion plays with your physicality, because the physicality is the lowest energy. And so that is a byproduct of the psychology and the emotionality. And so through the new units that we have, the vertical enhancement, the horizontal enhancement, the vision, and the cups of sweet and all this stuff, these are all ways and means to restore our energy vitality. And once we restore our energy vitality, then it's up to us to manifest this into the original emotional and physical vitality that we had as youth. And we can do this. But we have choices where we can do this plasmatically, we can do this physically, or we can do this plasmatically and physically in combination. We have always had these choices, but we haven't been aware. And the reason has to do with, obviously, the suppression of knowledge. So the knowledge brings out the truth. Now we have the truth. And everything that Mr. Kesh has talked about in the Knowledge Seekers workshops is not pie in the sky. It's already been done. Been there, done that. Okay, it's just a matter of disclosure. Stay tuned. There's more coming.
So feel free, anyone, to open your microphone and make a comment of what you just heard, or perhaps ask a question. I know when you lift weights, it actually forces calcium into the bone, doesn't it? I've always heard that. And this is actually...
It creates a field force, Mark.
Okay.
It creates a field force perpendicular to your, your arm. And the side that you're doing the weightlifting on is the side that gets strengthened. Same thing happens to the plants. You see a long stem plant, say it has a stem that's 8 or 9 feet, and it's maybe 1 centimeter thick. And you say, well, how is that possible for that thing to bend in the wind without breaking? If our bones were so skinny, we I don't think we'd be able to open a door. But, this is what happens. So as the plant is blowing in the wind, whichever direction is blowing, the opposite is being strengthened. And that's how the stalk gets strengthened. Well, our bones get strengthened the same way. You use it or you lose it. And all this has to do is with a demand. And that demand is an exchange of energy. So, you find that weightlifters, why do they get stronger? Because they exercise every day. So they're stressing their bones to rise up to the occasion. What do we do when we are knowledge seekers? We stress our brains, and so our brains become stronger. What do we do when we improve our well-being? Then we stress our existence, and we have a more youthful outlook. And this is the beauty. When we understand how that the stress, that kind of stress is building, and whether we are stressing it mentally, emotionally, or physically is irrelevant. It all follows the same rules. So we are exchanging energy. We are creating an energy flow. And this is what we are. We are universal functionaries. And what we're doing, and this is my strong opinion, you have to ask yourself, why are we here? And we are here because of the interaction of the plasma field from the sun and the earth. And there's been a calling. There's a calling. This earth is hurting, and we are responsible. We have the capability of fixing it.
So if the soul comes in place and creates the physicality of the body, once all that's done, does it sort of sit back and say, now I've created you, I am a separate entity, you have the physicality and the soul of physicality. Does it intervene at all, or does the brain run the whole structure other than the interaction, let's say, of the emotions? Does the soul sit back even though it needs this structure to operate? It doesn't seem to intervene with the ability that it has to intervene, to correct things.
When we decide to tell the universe to shut up, then we've disconnected from our soul. Our soul will never do anything that violates the universal principles. It is because of this delay in consequences that we have a capability of doing anything stupid on this planet. And for whatever reason, we choose to do that because we have been told that there are certain rules. Okay, so, it's not what you know, it's who you know kind of thing. And who cares anyway? We'll just sweep it under the carpet. No one will know. Well, you're somebody. And if you sweep it under the carpet, then you know. And the moment that you know, the rest of the universe knows. And this is why this type of mentality, if we go into outer space, you will be lonely because the universe knows what you're up to. The universe doesn't listen to your physicality or your emotionality. The universe listens to your soul, okay? Because that's how energy moves throughout the universe. So when you want to be a liar and deceitful and double crossed, and you say, "Oh, you know, I'm getting away with it," you're not getting away with anything. What you're really doing is you're penalizing yourself. And so what you're doing is you're not only robbing energy from your neighbor, but you're actually robbing energy from yourself. And that is really the ultimate lesson. You cannot, just because you don't experience the consequences in a one-to-one relationship, and you have a delay in consequences, doesn't mean there aren't any consequences. There are consequences. There are consequences all the time. And you know, when we have a solution for peace on earth, heaven on earth, it's confounding to understand why we keep grasping for the anchor, you know, that sinks us to the bottom. The old tried and true traditional methods of getting us nowhere fast. We have an opportunity to make this a really beautiful place. And, you know, as I say, bring peace on earth.
I can let you know a few things about that cow's milk.
That's
Go
the
ahead.
you mean the gans of the cow? I think
Well,
Mr. Cash referred to milk as the gans of the cow.
that's true. But I'll tell you from personal experience, growing up on the farm, I drank a lot of cow's milk, but I also broke a lot of bones from riding motorcycles. And finally, the doctor looked at me and said, "How much milk do you drinking a day?" I says, "About 6 or 8 glasses." And of course, from the farm, we just make it, you know, no store-bought stuff. He said, "Stop the milk. Stop the milk," he said, "for 1 year and see how your bones progress." He said, "I don't want to see you anymore from all these broken bones from riding the motorcycle." So that's exactly what I did. And lo and behold, 1 year later, no more broken bones from riding bikes. Well, I learned how not to crash too, but I mean,
That helps.
that helps. Yes, that's true. But those are the days of no riding boots, no helmets, no nothing, just, you know, typical teenage and pre-teen kid just riding stuff and no brains. And maybe by that later on, my brain got the proper amount of calcium. I learned not how to crash. But I have found that when you look at the older people, that someone brought up here, or I think it was Alex, about when a person is older and they fall and they break their hip, the system doesn't last long after. Something happens. And I believe it has to do with the fact that no one figures out how important it is to talk to our body and listen to it. It'll give you all the signals of what's wrong and what to do. And listen to it. When your body needs rest, have rest. And I think this is the problem. We educate the people, you know, we have to have breakfast at 8 and dinner at 12 and supper at 6, and you got to go to bed at whatever. Just do like the animals do. Sleep when you're tired and eat when you're hungry. And I think we'll live a longer life. I pass the talking stick back to you, Mark.
And you know, Mr. Alex, Mr. Cash looks at cancer cells in a different way than most. He looks at it as, I think, sort of the cells live longer. They're trying to mutate in a way. And I know cancers definitely can be created from emotions or environmental factors, but, and he does believe in the chemotherapy. The only thing is you're putting in too much energy into the body. And then, of course, the cells cannot go through the small holes in the bones and things to pick up what they need. And I think he's also offered the solution to the pharmaceutical companies, and they haven't really picked up on it.
So you've really touched on a very important point, Mark, because our physicality, the way we are structured with a head, 2 arms, and 2 legs, and no horns, is our interaction with this environment. Now, if we go to a different environment, then that field strength is going to be different, and the demands on that field strength are going to be different. So, you know, will we be in the human form in that other environment? So I can't tell you at this point in time, because I don't know. But what I do know is that of the 7 billion people on this planet, we are all part of the same structure, but we're all unique. And so we all have a unique soul, and we all have a unique location. And then within that uniqueness, we have over 70 trillion cells in our body, and each of those cells is unique. So what we're seeing is within our body, and if you say, well, my body is going to have 2 arms and 2 legs. Well, what do you say to your kidney? Or what do you say to your liver? You know, are we kind of looking funny these days? You know, where's your arm and where's your leg? And then, you know, we look at the other animals, like I say, the moose has horns. What about an amoeba? You know, it's a single cell organism. It can move, it can digest. It must have a brain because it knows which way it's going. It knows which way is front, which way is back. What about a slug? Do you know which way a slug is going? Until it moves, you have no idea because the head and the tail look the same. How would you know if the slug is going backwards? And then, you know, can the slug go backwards? You know, these are all fascinations with nature, but it all boils down to this. Each one of those souls manifested on this planet with respect to their field strength. So we've manifested as humans. Dogs manifest as dogs, you know, and dogs can't speak a language that we understand, but you can communicate with your dog. And that is the beauty. So that's the same with the universal community. We cannot communicate with the universal community with words because words are a man-made construct. The universal construct is a plasmatic energy, and it operates at a higher field strength. So if we are determined to depend on what we can see and what we can touch, and we understand that the plasmatic energy, we can't touch it and we can't see it, you know? I love you. Yeah, really? How much? Well, I love you, Cadillac, you know, or I love you 4 liters of gas. You can't measure that, and you can't grab onto it. What we do understand is that we can grab onto a battery, but we cannot grab the energy within that battery. A lot of us understand we can deplete the energy of the battery, and this is what it is. The way we deplete it in physicality, we do it with electricity, which is the low way to do it. In the plasma science, we do it with the plasma energy, which is at least 1.849 magnitude of orders of magnitude higher, which is a lot, okay? And this is what is now capable for each and every one of us, because we now have an awareness. And the worst part about it, when you have the awareness, is the responsibility comes with it. So why I keep harping on the same thing, each and every one of us can create the cup of life in our kitchens, in our garages. Each and every one of us has this capability right now. And if that is not your priority, then, you know, everyone makes a choice and you have the consequences to live with that. I hope I've answered your question, Mark.
So if we start employing the vision enhancement glasses and the butterflies and the air enhancement unit, we're going to be able to absorb more fields from the universe and more knowledge of the universe. Will we be able to understand more about our physicality? I know the soul of physicality will be elevated, as well as the soul of the man, which will probably mean less problems, let's say, in the physicality. But will we understand? I'm thinking we're going to see all the different types of knowledge that we look at or we think we understand. We'll see a little bit clearer or a deeper understanding. I know he said it enhances the soul, the eye of the soul, to see through the eye of the soul more. So will we understand our own physicality more as well as the soul of the man more?
Well, of course, Mark, because the two parts to your question, you know, ask yourself the hard question: are you enjoying your physical presence on this planet?
Well,
And
I'm not unhappy with it, let's say.
you're not unhappy with your presence, but what about, the situation on this planet?
Oh, yes, it's very frustrating, no question.
Right.
Physicality, with the deceit and the betrayals and everything else that goes along with it. As Mr. Kesh says, he's played this game for long enough, and
Yeah, but we don't need that baggage. See, that's the point. We don't need it. That's baggage for nothing. Okay, so we have a capability of doing the other. So, what is it that is holding us back from doing that? It is the physical and emotional satisfaction of being in the physical realm. Okay, so we have based our satisfaction on falsehoods. And if we can base our satisfaction on the plasmatic reality, then all of a sudden new vistas open up. And then our perception of the physical enjoyment, which I must confess, that's one of the things that, I've had to look at
of course.
in my own soul searching. I enjoy being on this planet. Okay, but if I'm forced off this planet for whatever reason, I can go to another planet, or I don't know, I may come back, or I may say, hey, okay, enough of that. But the thing is that there is a sense of purpose now. We understand that, life isn't about getting up, going to work, coming home, and going to sleep. There's more. We're not demanding enough. Okay, we're accepting our schemes are too small. Right now we're looking at a situation. I mean, think about it. We have the solution in our hands how to get rid of this pandemic, and the government in Canada has become a laughing stock. We have probably the harshest lockdown conditions of any country around the world right now, which has now been extended as of this week into August. Can you believe that? And yet people in China are walking around without any of these encumbrances. And, we're totally blasé about that whole thing. Why is that? Why are we deciding to, shall we say, stick our heads in the ground and ignore the obvious? It gives you that warm and fuzzy feeling. You don't want to know the truth. Why not? The truth is so rewarding. It is so relaxing. It is so empowering, and is so gratifying. And to know, like I say, I learned about getting rid of cancer 30 years ago. I don't go to sleep worried about cancer. I don't go to sleep worried about diabetes. Nobody in my family worries about that. Okay. What we've accumulated over the years is a better understanding of how this works. And it all works through energy in motion, energy exchange. You have to decide what it is that you want to give your time and energy to. And all of us are here, on a beautiful Sunday afternoon, on a holiday weekend. This actually is the May 2-4 weekend in Canada, which is we don't need more excuses to get drunk, but it's always handy. And this is what people are preoccupied with. They're not preoccupied with the loss of personal freedom. I don't understand that. That's just ignorance. Okay. All of us have the capability of doing this, improving the quality of our life. The quality of our life is very important, because not only does it give us physical and emotional satisfaction, but it extends to this planet, the sun, the interaction with this planet, the solar system, and the universe. Okay? We are part and parcel of the whole thing. There is no participant observer relationship here. We are part of the whole deal. Okay, so what we do, what we think, what we are, what we give our time and attention to matters all the time. So as plasma field energies are always repositioning, we do the same thing. So whatever we're doing today is repositioning something somewhere. And that's what makes this particular meeting so gratifying, because this is an international community. We have people from all over the world here who have given their time up to come here because it's what matters. They want to make a difference to their life, make a difference to their community, and they're trying to figure out how to do that. We're now being empowered more and more every day. We have the tools, and you know, for less than $10, you could have cups of life in your home and protect your home and spread the beautiful fields and connect with everybody around the world. What's wrong with that picture?
Yeah, I'm thinking it's almost like when you have a job and you've been there for 10 or 15 years, you're quite comfortable, you have a position, you have a pension or some other things, the job is easy, you have people working for you, all you have to do is show up. And it's maybe by using these tools and equating it with a job, so you wouldn't go out and look for another job because you think it's the end all and be all of the whole thing. But as we start to use these tools, maybe it's going to give us that opportunity to say, hey, there is a better position over there, an easier position, a more elevated position. And these tools that Mr. Kesh is providing us, these gifts, will allow us to see that the change is not as bad as we once thought, and that the whole show won't be over. And that was just my thought. There's a few things in the chat. Maybe you'd like to read that, Alex. Stephen,
Yeah.
would you like to come in here at all? Or I think you've put a few things in there. Yes, we're learning quite a lot. As Mr. Kesh has told us, I think the gig is up, so to speak, where it's starting to come out where a lot of these things that we've been told are actually incorrect, and that the people have been subject to this emotionally damaging and damaging to the physicality with all the things from the lockdowns to the other things. Has been quite a storm, let's say, to your own emotions, which again, if the emotions go out of balance too far, then the disease starts to manifest. So I think the tools that we're getting are going to allow us to see things in a new dimension, in a way, besides going into a new dimension. And as I said, rather than take the vacation for $1,000 or a few $1,000s, it might be a very wise move to get a hold of some of these tools. But again, that's up to you. As he said, you can bring the child to the water, but you can't force them to drink, and he's not going to force anyone to do anything. And it's up to us to take those steps. Would anyone like to open their microphone? There's 48 reactors here, 48 knowledge seekers, 48 beautiful souls, besides the others that we are not aware of are here with us. You silenced the crowd again, Alex.
Hello,
Go
Mark.
ahead, Stephen. Yes.
Yeah, no, I just I put in some information about the recent updates from the CDC and how they continue to manipulate the numbers now to support the gene therapies that they're selling as vaccines. And so it kind of goes into the history of how the nasal swab test it's never been a test for a virus. And although we've been saying this for over a year, the RT-PCR test was never designed as a diagnostic tool to identify viruses or infections. It's always been used by the medical industry to infer that someone with no symptoms was infected, or someone that had symptoms of something died and the infection was present. So this latest revelation from the CDC shows that how they've now changed the definition of cases, where we had your classic case of infection was someone that was seeking medical care or was getting treatments because they had some kind of medical issue. That was originally the definition of a medical case. But for this COVID-19, it was the definition was changed to anyone that had been tested with the RT-PCR and had a positive test result. And so even though they were completely asymptomatic, they had no issues, nothing, the case numbers, which we call a case-demic, was what was driving the pandemic in the beginning. So when you look at the data of the hospitalizations or the people actually being treated in hospitals, when the numbers were going down, but yet the cases were continuing to be raised, is because they were using this meaningless scientific test to support those numbers. And now they've come out and shown that to get more people to be less vaccine hesitant, that they have no longer a case is no longer someone that just tests positive and is asymptomatic. Now you actually have to have been, have symptoms. And then, so for the vaccine patients, they are no longer going to be tested, even though, as a lot of people have seen, like with the Yankee baseball players, or a lot of people are testing positive from COVID after having taken the vaccine, which doesn't make any sense, because these are not attenuated vaccines of the past where you have an attenuated virus that's added to a serum that allows you to build antibodies. These are gene therapies that have no instance or no ingredient of the actual virus in the serum. So it's interesting to watch how they're now, to perpetuate the vaccine consumption, they're using this scientifically meaningless test to support the fact that the cases are coming down, which we're glad to see that the numbers are coming down, and then less people are getting, but the whole manipulation of this whole pandemic has been through this meaningless scientific test, which also was the first identifier of this new novel virus, which is also disturbing too. And so they used it, and the test has been around for 30 years. It was originally tried to be used to identify HIV that caused AIDS. So they knew what they were doing when they used this manufacturing process to push the narrative. And you tell people about it, and it doesn't even in the packaging or the documentation from the manufacturer, it says not for diagnostic purposes. It does not determine SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 infections. And it's just, how many times do we have to keep talking about this? But yet the more we keep talking about it, at least it gives an opportunity for people to hopefully make better informed decisions. And that kind of helps relieve some of the fear. And
The big thing, Stephen, is as you can see by what I've been focusing on in terms of the classes, is that we have two purposes with the cups of life. And so the one has to deal directly with the pandemic. But what a lot of people are misunderstanding is that the cups of life are more than just that. This is where the beauty of the system has come in. So we're trying to promote with respect to the understanding of the plasma science is that when each and every one of us can create this plasma field, this plasma field is working on a plasmatic basis, which is at a higher transcendental dimension in the range on this planet, much higher than what you were just describing. And this is what dominates. And so if we as plasma scientists, so we can make these cups of life within our homes and then join them up plasmatically through a communication on a soul basis, we can build up the peace dome. This is what is going to override in the long haul. When we look at the history and we find that we have little individual battles, and we find that this becomes very time consuming and tedious. Now we're looking at doing it all in one go. Can we teach everybody going through all these basic classes? No, all what we're trying to do is bring a nearness and proximity. I hope my internet is okay here. We're trying to bring a nearness and proximity so that there is a bridge between the advanced teachings that are coming from the Keshe Foundation and the knowledge that we've accumulated so far. We don't need to throw anything away. We have a basis of knowledge. We have some misinterpretation of knowledge that has to be corrected, and we are correcting that. And the way to do that is when we take theories, theories are only good as long as they work. Once they don't work, doesn't matter how many times you prove them, you only have to disprove them once. And all of these theories on conventional health systems and everything have been disproved over and over again. But we keep rehashing, and we don't want to rehash anymore. What we're looking at is to understand how important the cups of life are within our life and introduce them into our environment. And this, particularly from a Canadian point of view, is extremely difficult. I think it is difficult in every country around the world when we look at the numbers. But as the plasma domes are building, this gets easier. And at some point in time, it just snaps over. The poles flip, and you wake up in the morning and say, hey, this is not working. We're not going to do this anymore. And we're going to do what it takes. And we have the capability now. And this is where the beauty is going to set in. We are on the verge of flipping that pole.
Alex, if I could ask you, I hope your internet stays up. The logo that you had with the moose, it seems like I'm seeing more than 4 legs. I see a second moose in the background. Yeah, now what's going on? Is that his partner or walking with him, or is it's green?
Well, don't you think a moose has, well, sure, they live in the marsh. They live in the forest. What do you think? A moose is going to walk down the driveway, your driveway? Well, actually, it has happened. It's pretty scary when that happens because you have to look up. But no, they.
Okay. I know sometimes mooses will put some vegetation on their horns and things to make them look more intimidating, let's say, to an opponent.
Oh, they're not worried about being intimidated to anybody.
Yeah.
Are you kidding? You know how big these things are?
Yeah, they're huge structures. I know we had someone that actually hit a moose and died on the Merritt Parkway a couple of years ago. I don't know where it came from, New York State, and drifted down, and it wasn't even the largest moose. It was.
Well, I asked the question, why, what is the safest, if you're confronted with a moose, what's the safest spot to hit the moose? And he said that doesn't exist. The safest spot is to hit the ditch. And the thing about the moose is you don't hit the moose. The moose hits you from the side. And if he runs in front of your car and you knock its legs out, well, the horns come in and finish you off. It's I've seen 3 accidents in 1 week in my place here, so it's no joke. There's these but the thing is that they are not attacking creatures. They don't like us either. So they know enough to stay away from us. So yeah.
So the green is just vegetation on another moose.
Well, they're in the background. They're in the
Yeah, okay,
yeah.
okay. I just thought so I could explain that if anyone asked me.
Even mooses have love.
Oh, for sure.
So, you know, anyway, it's an interesting conversation point, isn't it? Yes, sir.
Okay, is there anyone else who'd like to share something with us? I noticed, Dean, in the last workshop, if you're here, I think you are here, it seemed to break up for a few minutes, and that was the typical Mr. Ketch wasn't in the studio. And we missed a part of it, a few sentences, I think, there, and that was because he was from a remote location. He was traveling, I think, and otherwise, if it would have been in the studio, I would have thought that we'd have a clear, totally clear workshop. I don't know if you noticed that, and that's when he started to talk and was finishing up about the glasses and the butterflies and the air enhancement unit. Dean may not be close to his mic or unable to open it at this point.